African literature. Overview. Origin and history. African literature encompasses a vast body of work originating from the continent of Africa, written in both indigenous and colonial languages. The oral tradition is a foundational aspect of African literature, with stories, proverbs, and songs passed down through generations before being documented in written form. Written African literature began to emerge more prominently during the colonial period when African writers started to use European languages, like English, French, Portuguese, to express their experiences under colonial rule. Evolution. African literature has evolved through various stages. Oral tradition. The earliest form of African literature was oral, with stories, myths, legends, and folklore being central to community life. Colonial literature. With the advent of European colonization, African writers began documenting their experiences of colonial oppression, often using the language of their colonizers. Post-colonial literature. After independence, African literature took on themes of nation-building, identity, and decolonization. Writers sought to reclaim African culture and histories that had been suppressed or distorted by colonial powers. Contemporary literature. Modern African literature continues to explore issues like globalization, migration, political corruption, gender, and the environment, while also experimenting with form and narrative style. Concept and definition. African literature is defined by its diverse range of voices, themes, and styles that reflect the continent's rich cultural heritage. It includes works in multiple languages and covers various genres, including novels, poetry, drama, and short stories. Central themes often revolve around identity, tradition versus modernity, colonialism, post-colonialism, and the complexities of African societies. Key features. Orality. Even in written form, many African literary works retain the rhythms, patterns, and structures of oral storytelling. Cultural context. African literature is deeply rooted in the social, political, and cultural contexts of African societies. Language. A blend of indigenous languages and European languages, with some writers incorporating African proverbs, idioms, and expressions into their work. Themes. Common themes include colonialism, post-colonialism, identity, diaspora, tradition, conflict, and change. Pioneering figures. Chinua Achebe, often called the father of modern African literature, his novel Things Fall Apart is a seminal work that explores the effects of colonialism on African societies. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, a Kenyan writer and theorist who advocates for the use of indigenous African languages in literature. His works often focus on the themes of decolonization and the power of language. Wole Soyinka, a Nigerian playwright and poet, and the first African to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, 1986. His works explore the tensions between tradition and modernity in African society. Nadine Gordimer, a South African writer and political activist who won the Nobel Prize in Literature, 1991. Her works often deal with apartheid and the struggles of individuals in oppressive societies. Texts. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. Petals of Blood by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. A Grain of Wheat by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. The Famished Road by Ben Okri. Cry, The Beloved Country by Alan Paton. So Long a Letter by Mariama Ba. Contribution and impact. African literature has made significant contributions to world literature by providing unique perspectives on colonialism, post-colonialism, and the human condition. It has challenged stereotypes about Africa and Africans, offered critical insights into the continent's history and contemporary issues, and enriched global literary traditions with its diverse voices and innovative narrative techniques. Conclusion. African literature is a dynamic and evolving field that reflects the continent's rich cultural, social, and political diversity. Its impact is far-reaching, influencing global literature and offering profound insights into the African experience. Pre-colonial period before 19th century. Oral traditions. African literature begins with a rich tradition of oral storytelling. This includes folktales, proverbs, myths, legends, and epic poems. These oral narratives serve as a way to preserve history, impart moral lessons, and entertain. Griot tradition. In West Africa, griots traditional storytellers play a crucial role in preserving the history and culture of their people through songs, poetry, and storytelling. Colonial period 19th century to early 20th century. 1800s. As European powers colonize Africa, the written form of African literature starts to develop. African writers begin using European languages English, French, Portuguese to document their experiences and respond to colonialism. Late 1800s, early 1900s. Missionary schools introduce literacy to many Africans, leading to the first generation of African writers who begin to write down oral narratives and produce works in European languages. Early 20th century, 1900s to 1940s. 1911. Chaka by Thomas Mofolo, a novel written in Sesotho, is one of the earliest African novels. It tells the story of the Zulu king Shaka. 1920s, 1930s. The Harlem Renaissance in the United States influences African intellectuals and writers, leading to a rise in Pan-African consciousness. African writers start to express anti-colonial sentiments and explore African identity. 1939. Saul Plaatje, a South African writer and activist, publishes Moody, one of the first English-language novels by an African author, which blends historical narrative with fiction. Mid-20th century, 1940s to 1960s. 1948. Cry, The Beloved Country by Alan Paton is published, highlighting the racial injustices in South Africa. 1950s. African literature sees a significant rise in anti-colonial themes as the independence movements across the continent gain momentum. 1952. Chinua Achebe begins work on Things Fall Apart, a novel that would later become a seminal work in African literature. 1958. Things Fall Apart is published, marking a pivotal moment in African literature. It addresses the clash between traditional African culture and colonialism. 1960s. As African countries gain independence, African writers begin exploring post-colonial themes, such as identity, nationhood, and the impact of colonialism. This period is often seen as the golden age of African literature. Post-independence period, 1960s to 1980s. 1960s. The Heinemann African Writers series is launched, providing a platform for African writers to reach a global audience. Key figures like Wole Soyinka, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and Chinua Achebe gain international recognition. 1963. Wole Soyinka's A Dance of the Forests is performed as part of Nigeria's independence celebrations, marking him as a major literary voice. 1967. Ngugi wa Thiong'o publishes A Grain of Wheat, exploring the impact of the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. 1980s. African literature continues to evolve, with writers like Buchi Emeketa, Mariama Ba, and Ama-Ata Edu exploring gender issues and the role of women in African society. Modern and contemporary period, 1990s to present. 1991. Nadine Gordimer wins the Nobel Prize in Literature for her work exploring the complexities of life in apartheid South Africa. 2000s. A new generation of African writers emerges, including Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who explores themes of identity, migration, and post-colonialism in works like Half of a Yellow Sunday, 2006. 2004. The Caine Prize for African Writing is established, highlighting emerging African writers and promoting contemporary African literature globally. 2010s present. African literature continues to flourish, with writers like Teju Cole, No Violet Bulawayo, and Sisi Dangarembga gaining international acclaim. Themes in contemporary African literature often include urbanization, diaspora, identity, and the impact of globalization. Key contributions and impact. Global recognition. African literature has gained global recognition, with African writers winning prestigious awards like the Nobel Prize, the Booker Prize, and the Caine Prize. Cultural reclamation. African literature has played a crucial role in reclaiming African history, culture, and identity from colonial narratives. Diverse voices. The diversity of languages, cultures, and experiences across the African continent is reflected in its literature, offering a wide range of perspectives on human experience. This timeline highlights the significant milestones in the development of African literature, illustrating its evolution from oral traditions to a globally recognized literary tradition. When discussing African literature, several main arguments have emerged, reflecting the themes, concerns, and contexts that have shaped this diverse body of work. Here are some of the key arguments, along with examples from notable African literary texts. 1. Colonialism and its impact on African identity. Argument. African literature frequently addresses the profound impact of colonialism on African identity, culture, and society. Writers often explore how colonial rule disrupted traditional ways of life, imposed foreign values, and led to a crisis of identity among Africans. Example: Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, 1958. Achebe's novel is a classic example of how colonialism impacted African societies. The story follows Okonkwo, a proud Igbo warrior, whose life is upended by the arrival of British colonizers and Christian missionaries. The novel portrays the clash between traditional African culture and the new colonial order, highlighting the disintegration of Igbo society under colonial rule. 2. Post-colonial struggles and nation building. Argument: after gaining independence, many African nations faced significant challenges in building new, post-colonial identities. African literature explores themes of nation building, political corruption, and the complexities of forging a new identity in the post-colonial context. Example: Ngugi wa Thiong'o's A Grain of Wheat, 1967. This novel examines the aftermath of the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya and the challenges faced by the newly independent nation. Ngugi explores the themes of betrayal, sacrifice, and the difficulty of achieving true freedom. The novel highlights the tension between personal and collective identities in the post-colonial nation. 3. The role of language in African literature. Argument: the use of colonial languages English, French, Portuguese in African literature has been a contentious issue. Some argue that writing in these languages is a form of cultural imperialism, while others see it as a pragmatic choice that allows African writers to reach a global audience. Example: Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Decolonizing the Mind, 1986. In this critical work, Ngugi argues for the use of indigenous African languages in literature. He believes that language is a carrier of culture and that writing in African languages is essential for the decolonization of African minds. Ngugi himself shifted from writing in English to writing in his native Gikuyu, starting with his novel Kaitani Mutharaba in Eat Devil on the Cross. 4. Gender and feminism in African literature. Argument: African literature often addresses the roles and experiences of women in African societies, challenging traditional gender norms and highlighting the struggles women face in patriarchal systems. Feminist themes in African literature explore the intersection of gender, culture, and power. Example: Buchi Emeka's The Joys of Motherhood, 1979. This novel tells the story of Nnu Ego, a woman in colonial Nigeria who struggles with societal expectations of motherhood and womanhood. Emeka critiques the oppressed traditional roles assigned to women, showing how they are compounded by the economic and social pressures of colonialism. 5. The diaspora and identity. Argument: African literature by writers in the diaspora often grapples with themes of identity, belonging, and the experience of living between cultures. These works explore the challenges of maintaining a connection to African heritage while navigating life in a foreign country. Example: Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Americana, 2013. Adichie's novel follows the story of Ifemalu, a Nigerian woman who moves to the United States for education and encounters the complexities of race, identity, and belonging in the diaspora. The novel explores what it means to be African in a globalized world and the struggles of maintaining one's cultural identity in a different context. 6. The environment and eco-criticism. Argument: African literature increasingly addresses environmental issues, examining the relationship between humans and the natural world. These works often reflect on the impact of colonization, industrialization, and globalization on Africa's environment. Example: Wangari Maathai's Unbowed, a memoir, 2006. While not fiction, Maathai's memoir provides a powerful example of eco-criticism in African literature. As the founder of the Green Belt movement, Maathai's work focuses on environmental conservation and the empowerment of women in Kenya. Her writing draws attention to the exploitation of African land and resources, advocating for sustainable practices and the protection of the environment. 7. Tradition versus modernity. Argument: African literature often explores the tension between traditional African values and the forces of modernity. This theme examines how African societies navigate the pressures of modernization while trying to preserve their cultural heritage. Example: Wole Soyinka's Death and the King's Horseman, 1975. This play is set in colonial Nigeria and revolves around the ritual suicide of the King's Horseman, a traditional practice meant to ensure the transition of the king's spirit to the afterlife. The British colonial authorities intervene, leading to tragic consequences. Soyinka explores the conflict between traditional African practices and the imposition of Western values. 8. The role of oral tradition in modern African literature. Argument: African literature, even in its written form, is deeply influenced by the continent's oral traditions. Writers often incorporate elements of oral storytelling, such as proverbs, folklore, and communal narratives, into their work. Example: Amos Tutuola's The Palm Wine Drinkard, 1952. This novel is heavily influenced by Yoruba oral traditions. It tells the fantastical story of a man who embarks on a journey to bring his dead palm wine tapster back to life. Tutuola's use of oral storytelling techniques, such as repetition, episodic structure, and vivid imagery, reflects the influence of oral traditions on written African literature. These arguments and examples demonstrate the richness and diversity of African literature, highlighting how it addresses complex themes relevant to the African experience and beyond. African literature holds immense significance and relevance in the global literary landscape, contributing to our understanding of the human experience, history, culture, and the post-colonial world. Here's an exploration of its legacy, contribution, and impact. *1. Significance and relevance. Cultural representation. African literature plays a crucial role in representing the diverse cultures, languages, and traditions of the African continent. It provides an authentic voice to the stories, experiences, and histories of African people, countering stereotypes and challenging the single story often portrayed in mainstream media. Historical documentation. African literature serves as a historical record, documenting the impact of colonization, the struggles for independence, and the ongoing challenges faced by African nations. It preserves the oral traditions and collective memories of African societies, ensuring that these stories are not lost to time. Exploration of identity. African literature is deeply concerned with questions of identity, exploring the complexities of individual and collective identities in the context of colonialism, post-colonialism, and globalization. It delves into the struggles of African people to reclaim their cultural heritage and assert their identities in a rapidly changing world. Engagement with global themes. African literature addresses universal themes such as freedom, justice, oppression, resilience, and the human condition. By doing so, it engages with readers worldwide, fostering empathy and understanding across cultural boundaries. *2. Legacy. Canon formation. African literature has contributed to the global literary canon, with works by African authors being studied and celebrated in academic institutions around the world. Writers like Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, and Ngugi wa Thiong'o have left an indelible mark on world literature, influencing generations of writers and scholars. Cultural revival. The literature of Africa has played a significant role in the cultural revival of the continent. By reclaiming African narratives and promoting indigenous languages and traditions, African literature has helped to restore pride and confidence in African cultural identities. Resistance and liberation. The legacy of African literature is closely tied to its role in resistance movements and the fight for liberation. Literature served as a tool for resistance against colonialism and apartheid, inspiring social and political change. Authors like Nadine Gordimer and Dennis Brutus used their work to critique oppressive regimes and advocate for justice. *3. Contribution. Language and literature. African writers have contributed to the development of literature in both African and European languages. While some have chosen to write in colonial languages to reach a broader audience, others have championed the use of African languages, contributing to the preservation and promotion of these languages in literature. Diverse perspectives. African literature offers a wide range of perspectives, reflecting the continent's diversity in terms of ethnicity, culture, language, and geography. This diversity enriches global literature by providing unique insights into the African experience and broadening the scope of literary discourse. Innovative forms. African literature is known for its innovative use of literary forms and techniques. Writers often blend oral traditions with written narratives, creating a hybrid form that reflects the dynamic and multifaceted nature of African storytelling. This has influenced literary movements and expanded the possibilities of literary expression. *4. Impact. Global awareness. African literature has brought global attention to the challenges and issues faced by African societies, such as poverty, corruption, environmental degradation, and social inequality. It has raised awareness of these issues and sparked conversations on a global scale. Literary prizes and recognition. African authors have gained international recognition, winning prestigious literary awards such as the Nobel Prize, the Booker Prize, and the Caine Prize. These achievements have not only elevated the status of African literature but also highlighted the continent's rich literary tradition. Inspiring social change. African literature has inspired social and political movements both within and outside the continent. Through powerful narratives that challenge the status quo, African writers have influenced public opinion, motivated activism, and contributed to social change. Influence on other literatures. The themes, styles, and techniques found in African literature have influenced other literatures around the world, particularly in the global South. The post-colonial discourse in African literature has shaped critical theory and literary studies, offering new ways of understanding power, culture, and identity. *5. Enduring legacy. Continued relevance. The themes explored in African literature, identity, resistance, freedom, and cultural preservation, remain relevant today, resonating with readers in the context of ongoing global challenges such as migration, inequality, and climate change. A platform for emerging voices. African literature continues to provide a platform for new and emerging voices, particularly through initiatives like the Caine Prize for African Writing. These platforms ensure that the legacy of African literature continues to evolve, reflecting the changing realities of the continent. Cultural diplomacy. African literature serves as a form of cultural diplomacy, building bridges between Africa and the rest of the world. It fosters cross-cultural dialogue, promotes mutual understanding, and challenges stereotypes, contributing to a more nuanced and informed view of Africa on the global stage. In conclusion, African literature has made profound contributions to the world of literature and beyond, offering insights into the human experience, documenting history, and inspiring change. Its significance and impact will continue to be felt as new generations of writers carry forward the rich legacy of African storytelling. African literature encompasses a rich array of works, movements, and awards that have made significant contributions to global literature. Here's a look at some of the greatest works, key literary movements, notable awards, and unique aspects of African literature. Greatest works. Chinua Achebe's Things Fall Apart, 1958. Significance. Often considered the seminal work of African literature, this novel explores the clash between traditional Igbo culture and the forces of colonialism. Achebe's narrative provides a profound commentary on the effects of European colonization on African societies. Wole Soyinka's Death and the King's Horseman, 1975. Significance. A play that delves into the collision between traditional Yoruba customs and British colonial rule. Soyinka explores themes of duty, cultural conflict, and the tragic consequences of colonial intervention. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's A Grain of Wheat, 1967. Significance. This novel examines the complexities of the Kenyan independence struggle through a multi-perspective narrative. It highlights themes of betrayal, sacrifice, and the challenges of post-colonial nation-building. Nadine Gordimer's Berger's Daughter, 1979. Significance. A novel set against the backdrop of apartheid South Africa, it explores the personal and political struggles of a young woman whose family is deeply involved in the anti-apartheid movement. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Half of a Yellow Sunday, 2006. Significance. This novel is set during the Nigerian Civil War and offers a powerful exploration of the conflict's impact on individuals and society. Adichie's work is noted for its rich narrative and insight into the complexities of Nigerian history and identity. Toni Morrison's Beloved, 1987. Significance. Although Morrison is an American writer, her work is deeply relevant to African literature due to its exploration of African American history and trauma. Beloved examines the legacy of slavery and the struggle for identity and selfhood. Buchi Emeka's The Joys of Motherhood, 1979. Significance. This novel offers a critical perspective on the role of women in Nigerian society, addressing issues of gender, motherhood, and societal expectations. Key literary movements. Post-colonial literature. Overview. This movement focuses on the effects of colonialism and the process of decolonization. African writers within this movement explore themes of identity, cultural clash, and the legacy of colonial rule. Modernist literature. Overview. Modernism in African literature often involves experimentation with narrative techniques and forms. It reflects the disruptions caused by colonialism and the quest for a new identity in the face of rapid change. The African Renaissance. Overview. This movement, emerging in the late 20th century, emphasizes a revival of African cultural and artistic expressions. It seeks to reclaim and celebrate African heritage, traditions, and intellectual achievements. Afrofuturism. Overview. Afrofuturism combines elements of science fiction, fantasy, and speculative fiction with African cultural and historical references. It envisions alternative futures and explores the possibilities of technology and culture in African contexts. Notable awards. Nobel Prize in Literature. Notable winners. Wole Soyinka (1986) and Nadine Gordimer (1991) are prominent African authors who have won this prestigious award, recognizing their contributions to literature and their exploration of African themes. The Booker Prize. Notable winners. J.M. Coetzee, South Africa, has won the Booker Prize twice, for Life and Times of Michael K. 1983 and Disgraced 1999. His works address themes of apartheid and personal transformation. Kane Prize for African Writing. Overview. Established in 2000, this prize recognizes outstanding short stories by African writers. It aims to promote African writing and provide a platform for emerging voices. Winners include Helen Habila 2001 and Yvonne Adhiambo Owor 2003. Commonwealth Writers' Prize. Notable winners. African authors such as Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie 2005 have won this prize, which honors excellence in fiction by writers from Commonwealth countries. Uniqueness of African literature. Integration of oral traditions. African literature often incorporates elements of oral storytelling, including proverbs, myths, and communal narratives, creating a unique blend of oral and written forms. Multilingualism. The use of multiple languages, including indigenous African languages and colonial languages, reflects the linguistic diversity of the continent and highlights the challenges and opportunities of writing in a post-colonial context. Cultural and historical contexts. African literature provides deep insights into the continent's diverse cultures, histories, and social issues, offering a rich tapestry of narratives that reflect the complexity of African societies. Focus on social and political issues. Many African writers engage with pressing social and political issues, such as colonialism, post-colonial governance, gender roles, and environmental challenges. Their works often serve as critiques and commentaries on contemporary issues. Blending of genres. African literature frequently blends genres, such as combining elements of fantasy, realism, and historical narrative. This hybrid approach reflects the dynamic nature of African storytelling and its engagement with both traditional and modern influences. Overall, African literature's greatest works, movements, awards, and unique aspects contribute to its rich and diverse heritage, making it a vital part of the global literary landscape.